Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Yashodanandana Braja Jana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari जय नित्य लीला परिवेष्टकरा ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तरा श्रीमद हिज डिवाइन ग्रेस एसी भक्ति वेदांत स्वामी श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय जय ओम विष्णुपाद परमहंस परिव्राजकाचार्य अष्टोत्तर शत श्रीमद भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी महाराज प्रभुपाद की अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की नामाचार्य हरिदास ठाकुर की इस्कॉन फाउंडर आचार्य श्रील प्रभुपाद की प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासदि गौर भक्त वृंद की श्री श्री राधा कृष्ण गोप गोपीनाथ श्याम कुंड राधा कुंड गिरि गोवर्धन की वृंदावन धाम की मथुरा धाम की मायापुर नवदीप धाम की जगन्नाथपुरी धाम की गंगा माई यमुना माई की भक्ति देवी तुलसी महारानी की संकीर्तन महायज्ञ की समवेत गौर भक्त वृंद की गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि बोल. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to assembled devotees. All glories to Shri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya. Naranchaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudirayet. Before reciting this Srimad Bhagavatam, which is a very means of conquest, one should offer respectful obeisances unto the personality of Godhead, Narayana, unto Naranarayan Rishi, the supermost human being, unto Mother Saraswati, the goddess of learning, and unto Srila Vyasadeva, the author. So today we will be reading the verse number 46. First I will just do each word and then we can just repeat the whole sentence later. Kumara Uvacha Yaha Antarhitaha Hridi Gataha Api Duratmanam Tvam Saha Adya Eva Naha Nayanamulam Ananta Radha Yarhi Eva Karna Vivarena Guham Gataha Naha Pitra Anuvarnita Rahaha Bhavat Udbhavena Yo Antarito Hridigatopi Duratmanatvam यो अन्तरितो हृदि गतोऽपि दुरात्मना त्वं सोद्वैवनो नयनमूलमनन्तरादा सोद्वैवनो नयनमूलमनन्तरादा यर्हि इव कर्णविवरेण गुहं गतो नः यर्हि एव कर्णविवरेण गुहं गतो नः पित्रानुवृतरः भवत् उद्भवेन पित्रानुवर्णितरः भवत् उद्भवेन यो अन्तरितहृदि गतोऽपि दुरात्मना त्वं सोद्वैवनो नयनमूलमनन्तरादा यर्हि इव कर्णविवरेण गुहं गतो नः पित्रानुवृतरः भवद् उद्भवेन योऽन्तरितो हृदि गतोऽपि दुरात्मना त्वं सोद्वैवनो नयनमूलमनन्तरादा यहि एव कर्णविवरेण गुहं गतो नः पित्रानुवृतरः भवत् उद्भवेन कुमार ऊचु यो अन्तरितो हृदि गतोऽपि पित्रानुवृतरः भवत् उद्भवेन हृदि गतोऽपि दुरात्मना त्वं सोद्वैवनो नयनमूलमनन्तरादः यहेव कर्णविवरेण गुहं गतो नः पित्रानुवृतरः कुमार ऊचु Yavantarito hridigato piduratmanatvam Eva karna vivarena guham gato naha Pitranubrannitaraha bhavadvame. Mataji, Kumara Uchahu Yovantarito hridigato piduratmanatvam Santantarito mulamanantaradam Yarheva karna vivarena guham gato naha Pitranuvrintaraha bhavadvavena. Kumara Uchuhu. The Kumara said, Yaha, he who, Antarhitaha, not manifested, Hridi, in the heart, Gataha, is seated, Api, even though, Duratmanam, to the rascals, Tvam, you, Saha, he, Adya, today, Eva, certainly, Naha, of us, Nayanamulam, face to face, Ananta, O unlimited one, Radhaha, attained, Yarhi, when, Eva, certainly, Karna Vivarena, through the ears, Guham, intelligence, Gataha, have attained, Naha, our, Pitra, by your father, Anuvarnita, describe, Rahaha, mysteries, Bhagavad Udbhavena, by your appearance. Translation by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Translation. The Kumaras said, Our dear Lord, you are not manifested to the rascals, even though you are seated within the heart of everyone. But as far as we are concerned, we see you face to face. Although you are unlimited, the statements we have heard about you from our father Brahma through the years have now been actually realized by your kind appearance. Purport. The so-called yogis who concentrate their mind or meditate upon the impersonal or void are described here. This verse of Srimad Bhagavatam describes persons who are expected to be very expert yogis engaged in meditation, but who do not find the Supreme Personality of Godhead seated within the heart. These persons are described here as Duratma, which means a person who has very crooked heart or a less intelligent person. Just the opposite to Mahatma, which means one who has a broad heart. The so-called yogis who, although engaged in meditation, are not broad-hearted, cannot find the four-handed Narayan form, even though he is seated within their heart. Although the first realization of the Supreme Absolute Truth is impersonal Brahman, one should not remain satisfied with experiencing the impersonal effulgence of the Supreme Lord. In the Ishopanishad also, the devotee prays that the glaring effulgence of Brahman may be removed from his eyes so that he can see the real personal feature of the Lord and thus satisfy himself fully. Similarly, although the Lord is not visible in the beginning, because of his glaring bodily effulgence, if a devotee sincerely wants to see him, the Lord is revealed within him. It is said in the Bhagavad Gita that the Lord cannot be seen by our imperfect eyes, he cannot be heard by our imperfect ears, and he cannot be experienced by our imperfect senses. But that if one engages in devotional service with faith and devotion, then God reveals himself. Here the four sages, Sanat Kumara, Sanatana, Sanandana, and Sanaka, are described as actually sincere devotees. Although they had heard from their father Brahma about the personal feature of the Lord, only the impersonal feature Brahman was revealed to them. But because they were sincerely searching for the Lord, they finally saw his personal feature directly, which correspond with the description given by their father. They thus became fully satisfied. Here they express their gratitude because although they were foolish impersonalists in the beginning, by the grace of Lord they could now have the good fortune to see his personal feature. Another significant aspect of this verse is that sages describe their their experience of hearing from their father Brahma, who was born of the Lord directly. In other words, the disciplic succession from the Lord to Brahma, and from Brahma to Narada, and from Narada to Vyasa, and so on, is accepted here. Because the Kumaras were sons of Brahma, they had the opportunity to learn Vedic knowledge from the disciplic succession of Brahma, and therefore, in spite of their impersonal beginnings, they became, in the end, direct seers of the personal feature of the Lord. Thus ends the purport. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjanashalakaya Chakshurunilitam Mena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobishtam Stapitam Ena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yutapadakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Gurum Sagurajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Shri Lalita Vishakhanvitamscha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prastaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swamin Iti Namine Namaste Saraswate Devi Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarini Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gauratishe Namaha. He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dina Bandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostute Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Vancha Kalpatarubhyascha Krupa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Ye Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasati Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So today we'll be reading from this verse number 46, and in this class I would like to discuss two things. The first one is how a jnani and also an Ashtanga yogi realizes the God, and second thing is that what are the common principles of the yoga system which is applicable even in the Bhakti Yoga. Because as we all know that actually the four Kumaras were actually the jnanis, and in the verse number 45, the previous verse and today's verse, actually they mention about the yogis, the Ashtanga yogis, how they try to realize the God. So I would like to further elaborate on this in this lecture today, how a jnani realizes the God and what are some of the common principles between the Ashtanga Yoga and other forms of yoga with the Bhakti Yoga as well. As Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, there are 4 types of persons who approach God, and these are actually those people who are actually qualified to practice of bhakti. And this is mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita, 7th chapter, 16th verse, and also this is further elaborated in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu in the first volume and the 2nd chapter on the verse number 21. So there are four people. Who are they? Artha, Artharthi, Jignasu, and Jnani. So Artha means those who are sufferers, who are suffering in this material world, and Artharthi means those who are actually wanting to acquire some material happiness, and Jignasu means the inquirer, and the Jnani means those who are searching for the absolute truth. Because as we all know, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Dukkhalayam Ashashvatam, that many people in this world are actually suffering. So out of this suffering, those people who are pious, they approach God so that their suffering may be removed. So these are called as Artha. Artha means those people who are suffering and who wish to remove that suffering. And once the suffering is removed, then these people, they want to experience some positive happiness. So these Arthas, they become into Artharthis. Artharthis means now that the suffering is removed, now they want to get some material enjoyment for their pleasure. But however, this material enjoyment is something which is temporary. And those people who are actually intelligent, they not only want just some temporary short-term material benefits, but also look for some long-term, deeper happiness. And these people who are Artharthis, they gradually turn into Jignasu, means they inquire, they try to find out what is the even deeper happiness, more than just temporary material happiness. So they become Jignasu. And when this Jignasu becomes fortunate, when he comes in contact with the spiritual master, and then he comes in contact with the spiritual literature, then he becomes a Jnani. Jnani means basically he now has the access to the scriptural knowledge or the Vedic knowledge. So in this way, there are 4 categories of people who can potentially become devotees. But however, Krishna says that in the Bhagavad Gita, among all these 4, the Jnani is someone who is more dear to the Lord. Because as it is said in the next verse, in the 17th verse, Tesham Jnani Nitya Yukta Eka Bhaktir Vivashyate. Because the Jnani is not, when we say Jnani here, we're not referring to the impersonal Jnani, but the Jnani here is referring to that Jnani who has the knowledge of the Supreme Lord and who has bhakti towards the Lord. And out of all these 4, Krishna says that out of these 4, the Jnani is someone who is very dear to him. Whereas the others, Artha, Jignasu, Artharthi, they have to actually gradually elevate themselves to the platform of Jnani, which may happen in this lifetime or which may happen after multiple lifetimes, and achieve the perfection via becoming a Jnani. So, as it is said that of these, one who is in full knowledge of me and who is always engaged in the pure devotional service is the best. For I am very dear to him and he is very dear to me. And here the Krishna is referring to that Jnani who has the knowledge of the Supreme Lord and who has bhakti. But the problem is that this Artha, Jignasu, Artharthi, even though, the problem with them is that even though they are trying to, reduce their suffering and try to get some material opulence, but it may so happen that if they do not have sufficient intelligence, they may be diverted towards worshipping the demigods, and they may not directly lead to the path of bhakti. So in those cases, Krishna explains in the next verse, number 20, he says that sometime the other 3 may get attracted to the demigods. So those whose intelligence has been stolen by material desires surrender onto demigods and follow the particular rules and regulations of worship according to their own natures. So these people may or may not make to the level of Jnani and elevate themselves to the level of Bhakti. And this Jnani is also can be divided into further three categories. And whenever you are referring to Jnani, we are not referring to the impersonal Jnanis. So these Jnanis are actually someone who has the knowledge of the Lord's powers and knowledge of the Lord's sweetness and knowledge of the both. And the first one is basically called as a Jnana, means who knows the Lord's potencies. They are called as Jnanis. And who also knows the Lord's sweetness, they are called as Vijnana, means they also have realized the truth. Because in this today's verse, it itself said that, if you read the translation, the statements we have heard about you from our father Brahma, though the ears have now been actually realized by your kind appearance. So once this jnana becomes realized, that becomes a vijnana, means now he knows the Lord's sweetness also along with the Lord's powers. And these 4 Kumaras are actually, even though they are called as jnanis, but actually they are not like impersonalist jnanis. and because they do have a prior knowledge about the Supreme Lord, because they have heard from their father Brahma. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, in his commentary to the Bhagavad Gita, he actually refers to the four Kumaras as Jnana Mishra Bhaktas. Means not exactly like impersonalist Jnanis, but they are called as Jnana Mishra Bhaktas, who are in a gradual, who are elevating them gradually to the level of Bhagavan realization, but currently they only had an impersonal realization of the God. But however, in this chapter, as we can see, that by the contact of the Supreme Lord, they are able to become a pure devotees by the contact of by the Lord Himself. So in these two verses, verse number 45 and 46, actually we can see that the four Kumaras are actually talking about Ashtanga Yogis. So how the Ashtanga Yogis achieve perfection by obtaining those 8 siddhis, and how even though all the Ashtanga Yogis may or may not realize the Bhagavan feature of the Lord, and those who do not realize the Bhagavan feature, they are referred here as Duratmas. So now let's try to understand how this actually the Ashtanga Yogis try to realize the Lord. And the Ashtanga Yoga is basically the philosophy of Ashtanga Yoga is propagated by the Patanjalis, and that is where all the description of the Ashtanga Yoga is further explained. And these Ashtanga Yogis, basically they have 2 types of meditation. Either they meditate on the manifested nature, which is presided by different demigods, which is also referred as Sambhuti in the Isha Upanishad, or they actually meditate on something which is unmanifested nature, or Brahman, or Asambhuti. So the basic principle in the yoga, there are 2 things. One, you have Purusha and Prakriti. And in the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that Yavat Sanjayate Kinchit Sattvam Stavaram Jangamam Kshetra Kshetrajna Samyogat Tad Vidhi Bharatarshava. So basically there are 2 things. One is the Purusha and the other is Prakriti. The Purusha is the conscious, something which is conscious, the Supreme Lord, whereas the Prakriti is actually the inert matter, or it can also be called as a primordial matter or Pradhana. So in the beginning of the creation, when this Purusha comes in contact with the Prakriti, which is an unmanifested nature, the first one which comes out of it is called as Mahatattva. Mahatattva is actually the first manifestation, and this can also be referred to as a cosmic intelligence. And this Mahatattva further manifests as Ahankara, and this Ahankara further manifests as subtle elements, mind and the senses. And this manifested nature is actually called as, this manifested nature is actually presided by the deity called as Hiranyagarbha or Brahma, whereas the Prakriti, which is the Pradhana, is actually referred as unmanifested nature. So in this way, the yogi can either, the Ashtanga yogi, either he meditates on the manifested nature, Sambhuti, or on the unmanifested nature, Asambhuti. And according to that, basically, there are 2 types of samadhis which are described in the Yoga Sutras, which is called as Sabij Samadhi, which is attained by the meditation on the manifested nature, and it is also called as Nirbij Samadhi, which is actually meditation on the unmanifested nature or the Brahman nature. So what happens is that when a yogi, when he tries to meditate, first he is advised that he meditates on the manifested nature, like he meditates on the gross elements, and by meditating on the gross elements, a yogi acquires the siddhis. Just like by meditating on the water, basically he is able to get a siddhi where he can actually walk on the water. So like this, there are 8 siddhis. So gradually an Ashtanga yogi, by meditating on this, the manifested nature, gradually elevates himself or actually merges himself ultimately into the Purusha. And this stage is called as Kaivalya. And this is the ultimate goal of the Ashtanga yogi. How by meditating, gradually he elevates himself into merging into the Purusha nature of the Purusha of the Supreme Consciousness. But however, we can see that in the Ishopanishad, it is said that in the 12th verse, it is said, Andam tama parvishyanti ye sambhutam upasyate tato bhuya iva te tamo sayu sambhutyam rataha. So it is said that, but however, by worshipping on the manifested nature, a yogi actually enters the darkness, and by worshipping the unmanifested nature, he enters into the deeper darkness. Why is it so? Even though the goal is to ultimately reach the Kaivalya, but the Ishopanishad actually contradicts this understanding, and he says that by doing all this meditating on the manifested and unmanifested nature, actually the goal is darkness. Why is it so? The reason is because the first thing is that as I mentioned previously, a yogi, by meditating on all this, in the nature, he acquires the siddhis, the 8 supernatural powers. This is also called as Ashtasiddhi. And this Ashtasiddhi is actually diversion. This is a deviation, because a yogi, instead of, from his path towards realizing the self, he deviates by the acquiring of the Ashtasiddhis. And also, a lot of people actually, they don't really understand the process of meditation, and they actually meditate on something directly, they directly meditate on the unmanifested nature, which is actually not recommended. Even in the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it is said that first you meditate on the manifested natures, and then you gradually elevate to yourself to the unmanifested nature, and then further achieve the Kaivalya. But however, the so-called modern yogis, they don't understand this, and they directly meditate on something which is unmanifested or something void. This meditating on the void will lead you to nowhere. It will just lead you to the darkness. And as explained in the purport also here, they are called as Duratma. Duratma means basically who are crooked-hearted. Because even though their goal is ultimately the self-realization, but however, being diverted or deviated by achieving these 8 siddhis, they ultimately lose their ultimate goal of life, and they become duratmas. So in this way, even the yogis, they end up in a darkness. And even if they reach the level of Kaivalya, but it's still an impersonal realization. They haven't fully realized the Bhagavan feature of the Lord. So that is why in the next verse of the Ishopanishad, it is said that, "O my Lord, sustainer of all that lives, your real face is covered by your dazzling effulgence. Kindly remove that covering and exhibit you to your pure devotee." And that is why without bhakti, even this Ashtanga yogi, they cannot realize the Bhagavan feature. And that is why it's actually recommended that for this Ashtanga yogi, even though he's meditating on the Virat form, the manifested nature of the God, but if you see in the second canto of Bhagavatam, how the Lord is actually, how even this manifested nature, how it is related to the different limbs of Bhagavan. So in this way, because Patanjali doesn't really relate all these limbs to the Bhagavan feature, but however, without bhakti, it is not possible for this yogi to realize the Bhagavan feature. So that is why it is recommended that he meditates on the Virat form of the Lord, even though when the yogi is meditating on the different aspects of the creation, he sees in relationship to the Lord, just like how different things are actually different limbs of the God. So in this way, he has some foundation of the understanding of the Lord, whereby he will be able to gradually cross beyond the impersonal realization of the Lord. And this Virat form of the Lord that is why it's actually not an actual thing, it's just more of an imagination thing. Because the Virat form of our Lord is actually like an Upadhi form. It's not like an actual form. It is just an imagination, so that a yogi can actually constantly remember the Supreme Personality of Godhead, even though he's meditating on different aspects of the Lord. So in this way, an Ashtanga yogi gradually realizes the Bhagavan feature of the Lord. So now, and by overcoming the different obstacles, a yogi can be successful. Because there are two things. First of all, you know what's your goal, and you know where you are. So it's like from point A to point B. And you know the path, how to go from one point to other point, correct? So that is the knowledge of the process. But also we must make sure that there is no obstacles in our path as well. Because just knowing from where you are and where to go itself is not sufficient. But also you must also make sure that there are no obstacles in the path. Otherwise, what happens is that sometimes the progress may be slow, or sometimes the progress may be deviated. And they are called as obstacles. And these obstacles can actually be of two types. These can be broadly classified or categorized into two types. One is anarthas, and other as aparadas. Anarthas means those which are actually like unwanted, and these are something which are arising from one's past karma or one's improper performance of bhakti. And aparadas are those things, those obstacles which are actually offenses which are created. So in this way, we must make sure that that in our path, it's not only knowing our path, but also we must make sure that we are not having any obstacles in our path. And as mentioned previously, how Ashtanga Yogi has different obstacles in his path, how he could be deviated by those 8 siddhis. Similarly, even in the Bhakti Yoga also, we must make sure that we keep away these obstacles so that we progress towards achieving our ultimate goal of life, which is the love of Godhead. And these obstacles maybe okay, I think I want to tell you something, but we are actually running out of the time. So these obstacles, as we all know, the process is in the Bhakti Yoga is of nine steps, which is Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, Anardha Nivritti, Nishtha, Ruchi, Asakti, Bhava, and Prema. So similarly in the Bhakti Yoga also, we must make sure that we don't have any obstacles. And then even though sometimes, we actually compare the process of Bhakti Yoga as taking a path of elevator, correct? Like Ashtanga Yoga is like taking steps, and Bhakti is like taking an elevator, so you reach your destination very fast. But however, sometimes we may see that even though a person, a Bhakti Yogi practitioner, may be practicing Bhakti for many years, but sometimes he may feel some stagnation, or sometimes he may feel that he may not be making progress, very rapid progress. Why is it so? Even though the path of Bhakti is compared to an elevator, why is it that sometimes, even after 20 years, the devotee may be still feeling that he's not making a rapid progress? The reason is because even though the process of Bhakti is compared to like taking an elevator, but the assumption is that you are in the elevator, right? I mean, if you're outside the elevator may be going fast, but you're not inside the elevator. So in this way, so what is it means to be in the elevator? What it means is that to be in the platform of Nishtha, steadiness. So unless a person is steady, is firmly, steadily situated in the platform of Bhakti, it may not be possible for him to make a rapid progress. So all the first 4 stages, which is Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, Anartha Nivritti, there is some sort of unsteadiness. I mean, a devotee may not be fully steady yet. As it is explained in the Bhagavatam, Shravanam Shrunvatam Swadata Krishnam Punya Shravana Kirtanam Hridyantansa hi Abhadrani Vidunoti Suhritsatam. So here it is said that by hearing the glories of the Supreme Lord and by constantly rendering the service onto the pure devotees, all that is troublesome onto the heart is completely destroyed. Basically, it is talking about Anartha Nivritti. So this Anartha Nivritti is something which happens before Nishtha stage. So till the Anartha Nivritti happens, there is still some unsteadiness. Only once the Anartha Nivritti happens, all that is troublesome is almost completely destroyed, and that is where the Nishtha state, the Nishtha or the steady endeavor will happen. And someone may ask that, okay, now you say that, okay, unless you are in the platform of Nishtha, there is no steadiness. Now, how do I know that I am in the Nishtha platform? Like, is there any checklist or is there any way I can evaluate myself that I am in the Nishtha platform? And for this, actually, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur in his Madhurya Kadambini, he talks about 5 obstacles. He says that these are the 5 obstacles which are actually prohibiting oneself to be situating on the platform of Nishtha. So what are those? Actually, these 5 things are actually common with the Ashtanga Yoga also. Actually, these are taken from the Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, but it is applicable equally to the Bhakti Yoga and the Ashtanga Yoga, because in either cases, the discipline is required in the beginning stages. So what are those 5? Those 5 are Laya, Vikshepana, and Apratipati, Kashaya, and Rasavada. Means sleep, distraction, indifference, difference or disinterest in spiritual topics, tendency towards bad habits, and taste for material enjoyments. So by these 5 obstacles, we can understand ourselves, are we actually situated in the platform of Nishtha or not? Like, just to keep it simple, like the first one is Laya, which means sleep. Let's say that you are chanting, and then, or you're practicing your sadhana, and if you fall asleep, actually that's an obstacle. That means that you still have Laya, that obstacle within yourself. And Vikshepana means distraction. And let's say that you're chanting your Hare Krishna mantra, 16 rounds of chanting. But let's say that in between your chanting, you look at your mobile phone, or you talk to somebody, or you get distracted. That means that that is one of the obstacles, which is vikshepana. That is one of the obstacles which is prohibiting you from situating yourself in the Nishtha platform. And what is the other thing? Apratipati means disinterest in spiritual topics. And if you feel that you're not really genuinely interested in hearing the spiritual topics, that is actually one of the obstacles, which is called as apratipati. And kashaya means kashaya, which means tendency towards bad habits. Let's say that you still have some tendency to do some bad habits. That's one of the obstacles. And rasavada means taste for material enjoyments. So even though we are chanting and we are following all the 4 regulative principles, if we still have the taste for the material enjoyment, that means that we still have this obstacle. And so these are the things, these are the obstacles which are actually causing the unsteadiness which happens before the Nishtha platform. And only once overcomes these 5 obstacles, one can be situated in the strong Nishtha platform. And that is when the elevator process, like the fast, rapid advancement in the spiritual path happens. So, and how does this happen? Because see, what I mentioned here, these 5 things are actually gross obstacles, like gross impurities. And of course, even in the Nishtha platform, after the Nishtha platform also, there could be some subtle impurities like pride, arrogance, ego. And those things may still have to be dealt with, but at least these are some of the gross obstacles which one can try to overcome to be firmly situated on the platform of Nishtha. And how does it happen? This happens actually by surrendering onto the Guru. Once you surrender onto a Guru, then that is when a Guru can point out to you all these anarthas or the obstacles on your path of bhakti, and so that you can be firmly situated on the platform of Nishtha and gradually realize the Bhagavan feature of the Lord, I guess. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay. It's 8:34, so you want to take it. Maybe just one question, I guess. Okay. Bhakta Jimmy Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Is it on? Hare Krishna. Hare Krishna, Shyamachandra Prabhu. Thank you very much for the really nice class. I just had a question about you mentioned that the Virat Rupa is just like a upadi form. It's just like a mental, like imagination. Then what's the purpose of the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is all about the universal form, the Virat Rupa?
You're talking about why there is the reason for the 11th chapter in the Bhagavad Gita, the universal form.
If the universal form is just like imaginary, what's the context then of like the 11th chapter? Why is it?
Yeah, so the thing is that because these Ashtanga yogis who are practicing actually meditating on the different aspects of the Lord, of the manifested creation. So once they see the Virat form of the Lord, basically the intent of the Virat form of the Lord is so that they relate with the Bhagavan. They relate that every limb of all this creation with the limbs of different limbs of Bhagavan, so that these yogi, when they further gradually elevate, they don't become an atheist, or they see everything in relation to the God, or they see the superiority of the Bhagavan feature of the Lord. Okay, yeah. Thank you very much. Srimad Bhagavatam.